They called her prisoner 147A, but her real name was Alice. She was 17 Earth years old, the last of her kind in the deepest vault of the High Flame Citadel, an obsidian throne world that stretched like a bleeding crown into the clouds above Branthos Prime. She had been captured 3 solar cycles ago by the Galactic Empire during the cleansing of the outer colonies, branded a traitor simply for carrying medicine to refugees. They never told her what law she broke. They never had to. The Citadel was not a prison. It was a stage for cruelty built into the foundations of the Emperor's throne, where nobles and war commanders descended from their glass towers to sip fire wine and watch suffering turned into performance. To them, pain was a form of currency, and for entertainment that morning, they had chosen the girl from Earth. Alice hung by her wrists in the center of the execution circle, arms stretched above her until the bones ached with every breath. Her body was already marked by yesterday's tortures: scorched lashes, bone vibration rods, a dislocator collar. But today was different. Today they wanted screams, the kind that echoed through the Citadel's spires and reassured the ruling class that they still owned fear. The High Lords gathered slowly, draped in robes that shimmered with nano-dust, watching from balconies as guards approached with thermal spikes. She did not lift her head. Her eyes, too dry for tears, stared into the blood-soaked tiles beneath her feet. She no longer begged. She no longer spoke. She only breathed, ragged, sharp, quiet. And high above them all, chained in the obsidian cage suspended over the arena, hung Varnikar the Endless. He had not moved in years. 10 stories tall, his wings bound by gravity snares, his scales blacker than night, he was the galaxy's most feared dragon, devourer of cities, killer of kings, bane of fleets. Once a myth, now a trophy. The Empire had broken him long ago with a collar forged from a collapsed star's core, chaining his soul to silence. They used him now as a living monument of their conquest, a symbol to all who dared dream of rebellion. Even monsters kneel before the Empire. But Varnikar saw everything. His molten eyes opened the moment the guards drove the first spike into the girl's spine, and for the first time in 200 years his wings twitched. Not wide, not fast, just once. Enough to stir the dust in his cage. Enough to make a nearby guard look up in confusion and whisper, "Did you see?" But no one saw, no one heard except Alice. Her head rose weakly, and for a heartbeat through pain, blood, and silence, her eyes met his. She did not cry. She did not look away. And in that impossible gaze between prey and predator, something ancient stirred. Not recognition. He had seen that look once before, long ago, before he had names, before he had fire in the dying eyes of a child begging the stars not to leave them. And though no one noticed, a single ember glowed beneath Varnikar's chest. Not hot enough to be called flame, but enough to remember he had once burned for more than destruction. That night after the crowds had dispersed and the nobles returned to their towers, the girl was tossed back into her cell, a small metal box barely wide enough to lie flat in. Her body was covered in gel bandages, but the machines inside the walls monitored her vitals for one purpose only: to keep her alive until the next performance. Pain was a schedule in the Empire. She lay curled, listening to the distant hum of the Citadel's breath, the sounds of reactors, plasma rails, and the occasional scream from the floor above. But what she didn't hear was the shift in the air, a frequency so low, so buried in silence that it passed beneath the ear and straight into the bones: the dragon song. Above the Citadel, in the obsidian cage that had held him like a relic, Varnikar's fire stirred again. Deeper now, hungry, terrible. It had begun the moment her eyes met his, a tremble, a fracture, the realization that she had not broken, that her pain had not turned to hate. And in her refusal to scream, he had heard his name again. Not the one the Empire gave him, but the name he was born with. The one written in flame and sky, the one no tongue could speak but the stars. His chest burned. The pain collar lit in panic, pulsing energy into his spine, trying to shut him down. Dozens of technicians were alerted. Guards scrambled to the tower controls, and still the dragon's wings remained tight, unmoving. But his breath had changed. Each inhale vibrated with frequencies older than time. And then the surreal happened. One of the cage's obsidian bolts cracked. Only a hairline, but on Branthos Prime, obsidian forged from the dark crust of Alvarian, doesn't crack ever. One technician leaned close to his monitor and whispered, "This shouldn't be possible." Below in her cell, Alice jolted upright. She felt it like someone whispering a promise into the marrow of her soul. Something had shifted, not just in the stone, in the sky. And above them all, behind molten eyes and chains of starfire, Varnikar the Endless, the most feared being in the known galaxy, blinked once and remembered how it felt to be free. There were no stars that night over Branthos Prime, an unspoken omen the kind cartographers ignored but ancient seers once feared. The imperial calendar rolled into its second moon phase, and a silence hung over the high-flame citadel that no siren or curfew could explain. The great towers pulsed with their usual authority, gold-lit spires humming with static command. But something beneath the surface felt wrong, off, as if the very breath of the planet was caught in its throat. In her cell, Alice was not asleep. She hadn't truly slept in weeks. Her body floated somewhere between agony and numbness, a place that existed only for those the Empire deemed examples. But even in that strange haze, she felt it, the way the walls, the floor, the air had changed. The atmosphere was thicker, charged with something primal, like the air before a lightning strike. She pressed her palm against the cold metal beneath her cheek. It vibrated not from the usual generators or security pulses. It was deeper, rhythmic, alive. Above her, Varnikar's wings twitched again, not in fury, in preparation. He had stopped resisting the pain collar's attacks. He let the pulses surge through him like waves across stone. His body, forged from flame and void, had learned long ago that endurance was more terrifying than wrath. But something new had entered his mind now, not just vengeance, intention. The memory of freedom wasn't just a spark anymore, it had become a map. Every breath Alice had taken in defiance beneath his gaze, every time she refused to break beneath the Empire's gaze, had not merely stirred him. It had awoken a language lost to all known species, a bond between the innocent and the damned. And Varnikar had once been both. The bolts holding his cage began to hum at a pitch beyond sonic measurement. In the monitoring station, technicians silenced alarms, assuming they were phantom echoes or system echoes. Engineers scrolled through static-smeared displays, laughing nervously, convincing themselves that ancient steel didn't weep. They missed the first flicker, a single ember falling from the base of the cage. Then another. Then a slow line of smoke curling upward from the socket housing the collar's failsafe core. Varnikar was not moving, but he was undoing. Inside his mind, the ancient tongue of dragonkind echoed once more, not words but feeling, not rage but a hunger deeper than death, the same hunger he saw in her eyes when she bled in silence. And across the citadel, in darkened halls and silent chambers, shadows began to stir. Rats emerged from the ventilation ducts and ran. Starbirds, bred in the highest aviaries for the Emperor's amusement, smashed through their glass sanctuaries, fleeing without song. Nature, long suppressed on Branthos, remembered something that the Empire had forgotten, that when monsters love something, they do not burn, they cleanse. In the lowest prison wing, the guards assigned to Alice were asleep in their stations, unaware that the sleep had not come naturally. No alarms had sounded, no poison had been released, but something had slipped into the air, a breath of heat that dulled their senses and replaced command protocols with dreams of deserts, forests, and oceans long lost. Alice stood, though her legs buckled beneath her. She held the wall, coughing blood, but something in her chest pulsed with alien clarity. The girl who had barely survived the collar, the girl who'd been called a traitor for giving bread to children, the girl who once stared at her own reflection in the metal bowl and didn't recognize her face. Now she knew. Something was watching her. Not just watching, calling her. The cell door opened on its own. No lock disengaged, no guard activated the release. The metal simply melted quietly like snow vanishing in sunlight, and outside her cell stood the dragon Varnikar. He was no longer in chains, not truly. The collar still glowed with dying pulses, but it hung now like a rusted ornament around his neck, no longer binding, no longer breathing commands into his spine. His wings filled the corridor, his breath flickered with controlled fire. His eyes, those massive, ageless orbs, stared into her, not down at her. And for the first time in her young life, she felt seen. She didn't ask how, she didn't ask why. She just whispered, "You heard me, didn't you?" And though no words passed from his jaw, the thought pressed into her mind with unbearable clarity. "I did not hear you, I felt you, and that is stronger." She stepped forward. He lowered his head. She placed one bloodied hand against the curve of his snout. It glowed. Every inch of the citadel began to quake, not explode, not collapse, not roar with chaos, but tremble in fear, as if the building itself knew that something holy had occurred. The bond between the most feared dragon in the galaxy and a tortured human girl was not a rebellion, it was a prophecy fulfilled. Soldiers in the upper tower scrambled. Guards activated failsafe codes that no longer worked. The Emperor's voice, transmitted through citywide comms, screamed commands that dissolved into static, and Varnikar turned with Alice curled against the ridge of his neck. He unfolded wings that had not felt the wind in 2 centuries. And as the citadel's obsidian shell split open like a rotten husk, they rose, not in defiance but in declaration. The galaxy had turned its eyes away from Earth, from its scattered remnants, from its broken children. But that night under the ashen clouds of Branthos Prime, the stars saw the truth, that from a whisper in pain the dragon had answered, and it had remembered how to fly. They didn't fire right away. That was the first mistake. As Varnikar ascended from the shattered husk of the high-flame citadel, the silence across Branthos Prime was deafening. The towers stood frozen in their perfect symmetry, elegant structures of crystalline alloy and imperial steel built to intimidate lesser species. For generations, these towers had watched over subjugated moons and silenced revolts before they began. But now they watched something else. A black-scaled worm, wings unfolded like solar sails, carrying a bloodied human girl wrapped in linen and ash. Alice clung to his spine with what little strength she had, her fingers buried between scales, eyes squinting against the biting wind. Her ribs were still cracked, her back screamed with every heartbeat, yet she held on because the thought of returning to chains was more terrifying than falling. Below them, the first ship scrambled. Sentries from the orbital defense sector roared to life, skimming across the skyline with red-lit noses and beam turrets rotating toward the creature that had once served the Empire's bloodlust. The orders came in bursts, uncoordinated, panicked. Fire on sight. Take it down before it breaches atmosphere. Do not let the girl leave the surface. And still, no one fired. The soldiers inside those ships, born and raised beneath imperial banners, looked up and saw not a beast of destruction, but a being that had chosen to protect, for reasons no one could understand. And they hesitated long enough for the second mistake. Varnikar opened his mouth. The flame didn't come, not yet. Instead, he released a roar so ancient, so vast in depth that it didn't travel like sound, it traveled like memory. Across the surface of Branthos, civilians paused. Workers in the fuel mines stopped drilling. Children on the sublevels looked up from their rations. In every dark corner where resistance had long since died, someone blinked and remembered Earth, because it wasn't just any roar. It was the call of the sovereign flame, an echo of the old stars, once wielded only by the guardians of sentient life before the Empire had erased them. And the dragon who had once burned cities for sport had just used it to shield a girl. The scream of alarms followed soon after, but by then, the sky was burning in reverse. They hit him before he cleared the thermosphere. 2 interceptor drones pierced through the outer atmosphere, each fired from the planetary ring above Branthos, their trails marked with cold light and war steel. The first tore into Varnikar's flank just beneath the wing joint. His roar faltered, wings buckling. Alice screamed, her fingers slipping across the scaled ridge. She nearly fell. Nearly. But his tail coiled back, instinctive, sweeping her into the fold of his right wing before she could plummet into darkness. The second drone exploded near his neck, where the remnants of the pain collar still clung like a parasite. The blast shattered what remained of the lock node, sending fragments of neutronium spiraling into the void. And Varnikar's head snapped up, not in pain, but in clarity. The collar was gone, truly gone, and with it, every limitation that had once kept his flames smothered. Alice, shielded in the crook of his wing, felt the surge begin in his chest. It was not heat like any she had felt before, not rage, not chaos. It was perfect, a pulse of solar breath older than weapons, older than fear. As the next wave of assault ships screamed toward them, Varnikar twisted in midair, wounded, bleeding, but unyielding, and exhaled. But the fire did not destroy. It chose. Every Imperial vessel within his line of sight became frozen in gold stasis, locked mid-flight, systems dead. They did not crash. They simply stopped, trapped in midair as if the universe had paused to ask, "Are you sure you want to be enemies today?" From the ground, it looked like time itself had ruptured. 30 warships hung in the air like ornaments of failure. Varnikar's flame didn't scorch them. It forgave them, just this once. And because no one had ever seen a dragon forgive, the commanders watching from orbit forgot how to give orders. Alice pressed her face into the warm wall of his scales, weeping soundlessly, not because she was afraid, but because for the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and decided she didn't deserve to be erased. And she could feel it, deep in the tremor of his wings, that he wasn't done. Varnikar turned upward, blasting through the final layer of Branthos's gravity field with a burst of raw force that made entire satellites shudder in their orbits. He passed into open space, free, truly, impossibly, unforgivably free. And behind him, Branthos Prime, home of the high flame citadel, capital of cruelty, smoldered, not from destruction, but from shame. Because it had tortured a girl who never begged, and the galaxy's most feared dragon had loved her for it. Branthos Prime did not fall the way rebel strategists dreamed empires would. There were no marches through the capital, no triumphant flags hoisted on shattered towers, no glorious speeches broadcast to liberated systems. No, it fell under the weight of its own silence. The day after the dragon vanished into the stars carrying the tortured girl, Branthos awoke to something far more frightening than rebellion. Nothing. No parades, no announcements, no propaganda. Not a single Imperial broadcast aired. The screens in the sky remained dark, and across the Empire's core worlds, billions of subjects held their breath. Some still believed the dragon had been terminated. Others thought it a stunt, a carefully manufactured myth for some larger political purpose. But those who had felt the roar, those who stood near the citadel and saw the shadow that rose through flame, they knew. There had been no stunt, no plan. There had only been truth, and truth had wings. In the Imperial Senate, the Lord Primarchs convened an emergency session, demanding retaliation, demanding the extermination of all known dragons, though no others had existed for over 2 centuries. They accused rival factions of staging an uprising. They passed decree after decree, but none of it mattered because no one obeyed. Not the outer fleet captains, not the planetary governors, not even the AI command corps that ran the defense grids. Something about Varnikar's escape and the girl Alice had broken the current, an unexplainable fracture in obedience. Some said it was fear, but those who were closest to the old dragon knew it wasn't that. It was reverence, an unspoken knowing that the galaxy had changed course. And deep in the void, far beyond the reach of Imperial scans, Varnikar flew. His wounds were healing slowly. Alice slept against his neck, wrapped in a protective sling he built for her out of scale-shed hide and atmospheric filter mesh. He had brought her to a dead moon with breathable caverns, an ancient place he remembered only in pieces, one of the old nesting hollows from before the Empire burned them all. Here, no one could find her. Here, no one could command him. And here, the two of them began to speak. Not with words, not always, but with memory, with rhythm, with the bond forged not in comfort, but in fire and chains. Varnikar showed her visions, not just his pain, but the world he remembered. A time before conquest, when dragons weren't weapons, but sentinels, protectors of balance and lore. He showed her the first cities of flame glass, the star bridges they guarded, the agreements they once enforced between warring systems before humanity had even risen from its caves. And in turn, Alice told him about Earth, about a childhood she barely remembered, about a mother with garden hands and a father who played music no one listened to anymore, about being taken because she had tried to help a sick alien child in the wrong quadrant at the wrong time. She had suffered, yes, but she had remained. And that was something the Empire never understood. Some creatures, when broken, vanish. Others become wildfires. And as the stars listened, something new began to take shape. Not a war, not yet, but a promise. The broadcast came without warning, a pulse through the outer fringe networks, bypassing Imperial firewalls, hijacking long-dead beacons. It didn't come from a military channel or a resistance hideout. It came from a forgotten moon. The screen flickered on, a girl, pale, scarred, cloaked in dark cloth, before a sleeping dragon whose wings curled like mountain ridges behind her. She looked young, but her voice wasn't. "This is for those who watched me suffer and said nothing," she began. "This is for the prisoners still hanging in the dark, for the slaves told their pain was useful, for the orphans the Empire promised safety then discarded, and for those who believed their silence kept them safe." She stepped forward. "I want you to know something. He didn't save me." She gestured to the dragon. "I saved him." The galaxy blinked. Alice's voice rose, not with rage, but with crystal certainty. "And now we'll save each other." In that moment, across 7 sectors, children stood from their knees. Miners dropped their tools, smugglers powered down their engines, and a senator on Argonis 4 burned her own portrait, because the words weren't a threat, they were a beginning. A few hours later, the Empire declared the message false, a fake, a trick, some AI deepfake propaganda. They denied the dragon had ever escaped. They claimed the girl had perished under questioning, but no one believed them, because that night a defense cruiser on the edge of the Elzari belt reported something surreal. Their instruments failed, their firewalls collapsed, and then their captain heard a breath pass across every screen at once, low, ancient, alive. Not fire, not command, but a whisper, "We are awake." The message wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. Because now, every child who'd ever been told to kneel knew what the fire really meant. It wasn't death. It was the sound of something unkillable returning. The Empire did not understand what it had awakened. In all its simulations and military forecasts, in the long scrolls of prediction written by its tactical AI councils, nowhere did it account for a flame that did not want to conquer but to liberate. Nowhere did it calculate that one wounded girl could shift the orbit of loyalty around the galaxy. And yet, it began. Not with legions, not with guns, not with the screams of soldiers, but with whispers. On Galdrex, a mining child refused to enter the ore tunnels until the overseer said the name Alice. When the overseer spat on the ground instead, 10 other children joined the first, and the tunnels stayed empty. That same night, a dragon sigil was carved into the wall with a rusted pickaxe. By morning, every prisoner had walked free. On Zithurian, a penal moon, a prison warden streamed an anonymous broadcast. He knelt before his surveillance camera, armor removed, and said, "I once laughed when they tortured her. I don't laugh anymore." His prison collapsed 2 days later. No one found his body, but the prisoners wrote a single word on the blackened floor: return. Ships went missing. Fleets were reprogrammed. Long dormant outposts lit up with strange symbols, wings and fire etched in places no human hand could reach. The Empire responded the only way it knew how, with force. Fleets were deployed. Executions increased. Propaganda screens blazed brighter, louder, but it was too late, because truth doesn't need an army, it only needs a voice, and the girl with the dragon had given it one. In the heart of the galaxy's most secure military satellite, the Vice Admiral of the 3rd Star Legion watched as his map filled with blinking red alerts. Then all of them stopped, not because the enemy had surrendered, but because the systems had chosen not to obey. "Who did this?" he asked. A young lieutenant answered with trembling lips, "The one they call Flame Heart." The Vice Admiral blinked, "The girl." The lieutenant nodded. "No," the Vice Admiral whispered, "the dragon." And somewhere in deep space, coiled atop a moon that had no name, Varnikar opened his molten eyes and whispered back, "Both." They met her in orbit above Delvolvanis, a neutral moon untouched by war yet surrounded by it. Thousands came, not all to worship. Some came to kill her, some to test her, some simply to understand what it meant when the most feared creature in known history chose a human child over an empire. She didn't arrive on a throne. She didn't come cloaked in banners. She arrived asleep, curled in the crook of Varnikar's wing as the dragon descended in silence, wings spread like prophecy. No escorts, no weapons, just a myth made flesh and the girl who gave it purpose. The crowd waited. She stepped onto the landing platform barefoot, scars still visible, eyes calm. She spoke only once. "I am not your general, I am not your queen, I am not your symbol." She looked to the sky. "I am the girl they tried to break." Then to the thousands watching her, "And I am still here." At her side, Varnikar bowed, not as a beast to a master, but as a fire to the match that dared to be struck. The crowd knelt, not in submission, but in remembrance, because they had all felt it now, the thing the Empire had feared most. Not war, not rebellion, but hope that couldn't be silenced. And as stars blinked over Delvanis and old tyrants peered into their dying screens, one truth stretched across the galaxy like a dragon's wing in flight. The girl who did not scream had taught fire to feel again. And in return, the fire had given her the stars.